Yeah. All right, ladies. Who has particular interest in domestic violence or child abuse? Anyone? There we
You know,
go.
the only experience I had was when I did pediatric nursing. And it's one of the reasons I left pediatric nursing because taking care of children who had been abused with broken bones and cigarette burns and things like that was it was just a horrible experience.
I can imagine. Heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, when I moved to Denver in 1998, um, one of the first things I did was get a part-time job working at a domestic violence agency called Cogley and Associates. And I ended up running the female part of the agency, and John Cogley ran the male part of the agency. We had another psychologist working with us as well. And I got certified in domestic violence counseling because in the state of Colorado, it's a special certification process. And I did that for several years. And one of the things that I would do is periodically sub for the men's group. And some of you have heard this story before. And I would always give the hypoglycemia lecture. What happens when blood sugar drops? And I would challenge everybody. And this was a group mostly of ex-cons. These men had been arrested and imprisoned for domestic violence. So these were the hardcore guys. And they either had nothing for breakfast or they had Mountain Dew and Captain Crunch for breakfast, which is its own food group. And I would challenge them for 1 week to lay aside the Captain Crunch and Mountain Dew and eat my 20 grams of protein every 4 hours. So I was teaching this back in 1998. And then I'd have them report back to the group the next week. Now I wouldn't be in the group the next week, but the assignment was to report back. But these men would stop me in the hallway with tears running down their face, and they would say, "How come nobody ever told me this before? I've had no violent episode this entire week. In fact, I haven't even gotten angry this week. I've been able to stay calm and cool and utilize all the tools you guys were trying to give me. Why didn't anybody ever tell me this before?" So it was those stories that, is why I started the Academy in 2015 and then Eating Protein Saves Lives just a couple of years ago to get the power of eating protein out into the broader community, because this is about more than just preventing cravings and relapse. This is also about preventing violence. So let's talk about this for a moment. So there are different types of violence, and people are violent for different reasons. And some people are psychopaths and just plain violent. And this has nothing to do with blood sugar levels or much of anything else. It appears to be more of a hardwired thing. But everybody else, including, people who were arrested for crimes and for violent crimes, the things I'm going to be talking about today apply. And so specifically, I'm going to be talking about child abuse and domestic violence because it is such a horrific scourge in our society and around the world. But most of the time, domestic violence and child abuse are impulse control issues. It's not that people intend to be violent or want to be violent. Now, there are your psychopathic narcissists out there for whom this is not true. But everybody else, so in our domestic violence groups, we would find maybe a quarter of everybody there sort of had violence hardwired into them. 3/4 of everybody else, they found themselves being violent. They did not intend to be violent. They did not like being violent. They found themselves being violent. And they hated themselves for it. This is mothers, fathers, spouses, right? People in domestic relationships found themselves being violent and found themselves unable to stop the violence in the moment. And so we have to ask, what is going on in the brains and nervous system of people who find themselves being violent? Well, we have some answers. There's actually quite a few answers, and I'm not going to be covering them all today, but I'll mention them. But I'm going to start with blood sugar control because, in my experience, lower dropping blood sugar appears to be one of the common denominators among all violent episodes. Because when you really break it down and you ask people who'd had a violent episode, when was the last time they ate protein? It could be they don't eat protein. It could be 8 hours ago. It could be the day before. So one gentleman, and some of you have heard this story, one gentleman had a history, hardcore history of domestic violence, had gone to prison behind it, and he just lived in a chronic state of rage. And because of this, he was diagnosed with bipolar 1 because that was the only way the medical profession could biochemically name what could possibly be going on. So they haven't had him on medication, which actually didn't really make any difference at all. And he tried drinking alcohol to help control his rage, and that kind of sort of helped sometimes, but not really. And that, of course, then turned into alcohol use disorder and took on a life of his own. And so he finally got out of prison and he was off medication and he was sober. And he really, really wanted to put his life together. So the very first thing I did, as I always do, is get him on our 5-star pro recovery diet and get him eating protein every 4 hours. And for 3 or 4 months, and then he just did therapy. For 3 or 4 months, this man was a teddy bear, nicest, gentlest person in the world. He took full responsibility for his behavior. He was very compliant. He was very committed to becoming an upstanding citizen and really contributing to society. And I was very bewildered because how he was acting, what I was seeing, had no comparison whatsoever to what he was reporting his history was. And then one day he came in with rage rolling off him. His teeth were clenched, his fists were clenched, he was purple. And he stomps into my office and throws himself into his chair. And I very timidly, because I was actually frightened by the intensity of his rage. And